Hey guys, so I hope your exam went all right. What we're going to do now is we're going to spend the next couple weeks talking about viruses. Considering the situation we're in these days, I figured that organismal biology would be a great place to add in a chapter on viruses. I have taught about viruses before in organismal biology, even though it wasn't part of our plan this semester. But now it is. Okay, so what we're going to do is, for the first week, I'm going to have you guys be responsible for reading the chapter in your book and filling out the outline as we're going through the PowerPoints. And just like before, I'm going to be cutting them up into smaller sections so that you don't have like a 45-minute PowerPoint to watch. So it's chapter 19 in your book, and this is the general outline of the information. Actually, this is the first slide. Viruses. And here's our outline. We have our viruses alive, virus structure, virus replication, and viruses of pathogens. And then there's also going to be an additional exercise for you guys to do. You're going to watch a brand new documentary about COVID-19. You're going to fill out a study guide and do an additional exercise. And all of this stuff, including the PowerPoint and everything, and that additional exercise are all going to be fair game for your exam, which is a week from Friday. Okay, so the first question, are viruses alive? I would normally ask to see a show of hands in class, but clearly I can't do that right now. But typically, it's not that simple of an answer, which is why I would ask the question. It's sort of complicated. If you remember from early on in the term, like maybe our first week of class, in fact, we talked about the different characteristics of life, and this is what they were. Order, which means that whatever you happen to be talking about has a particular structure, and these different pieces and parts fit together to function in a particular way. That living things have chemical instructions, for example, DNA or RNA, which determines what the genetic makeup of the organism is. Living things have metabolic activities, for example, cellular respiration. In the case of plants, that would be, you would also have photosynthesis. Energy flow or matter cycling, which would be, for example, that they must acquire energy and that they must be able to excrete wastes. As an example, homeostasis, reproduction, and that they have to be capable of evolutionary adaptation in order to be considered living. So all of these are different characteristics of life from the very beginning of the semester when we talked about that. So the thing about viruses is that they have a lot of lifelike characteristics. This is a particular type of virus over here on the right, and it kind of looks like a bug or an insect of some type, but it is not. So some of the things, though, that it has that are very lifelike is that it is subject to evolution, so can undergo changes in genetic makeup over time. Populations can change over time genetically. They do have the ability to reproduce, so one virus can ultimately result in millions of other viruses. Do they carry DNA or RNA? Yes, they do. They have genes, they have proteins, and they behave in a particular way, which means, in this case, they can bind to receptors on cells, so they can move, and that also makes them seem like they are living things. A lot of folks think that the ability to reproduce is really the telltale sign if something is living. So here's a quote down here. Reproduction with gene-controlled heredity is the most basic attribute of life. And if that is your, if that's sort of your set point for what is a living thing, then viruses would meet that. However, they do also have some non-lifelike characteristics. This looks very different from the virus that I just showed you in the previous picture, but this is also a virus, just has a totally different shape. They do not have metabolism, so they don't do cellular respiration or anything like that. They do not have homeostasis. They can't sort of maintain their inner conditions at all. They don't respond to stimuli. They don't take in energy, so they don't eat or absorb food or anything like that, and they have no excretion. So these are a lot of characteristics that we said were required for life, but viruses can't do them. So if we were to take that original list and take into account the things that are lifelike and the things that are non-lifelike, we have that they have order, meaning they have particular structures and different parts that function together. They do have DNA or RNA, so they have chemical instructions. They undergo reproduction, and they can undergo evolution. But they don't have these three things. They don't have homeostasis, energy flow, or metabolic activities. And so typically what we think of as viruses, we say that they are sort of somewhere in between living and non-living things, but typically they get characterized as non-living things. So in your book, they basically state or characterize viruses as leading a borrowed life. So if you want to have a definition of a virus, it's an infectious particle that consists of genes that are packaged in a protein coat. So they're very simple. They're basically a container with genes in it. They are very simple, much more simple than even the most basic bacterial cells. They can reproduce, but they can't reproduce or do anything without the help of a host cell. So they need the host cell in order to carry out reproduction and for any metabolism to take place. The virus isn't really doing the metabolism, but it does direct the cell to do metabolism for it, which is pretty interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so, like I said, they're sort of in between living and non-living things, but typically they are characterized as non-living. Here is an image of viruses reproducing using a host cell. I think these are supposed to be human cells. It's a drawing, though. It's not a photograph or anything. And these guys right here are the viruses. And so you can see that they look like they're sort of budding off of this original cell, but that's not what's happening. This is the host cell, and you can just see that the viruses are emerging from it. So the host cell is helping them make more viruses. This is an actual image photograph of a human immune cell. The big white blob is the immune cell, and all these tiny, 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 tiny little red dots. Each one of those is an individual virus. So this is HIV, and HIV, the virus, is using this human immune cell to reproduce. And so basically all these tiny little red viruses are coming out of this immune cell, and they are essentially reproducing inside and then coming out. Okay, so that's where I'm going to stop for this first little section. And the next part we will talk about virus structure.